Welcome back to Beyond the Wrench. My name is Jay Goninen, and I am your host. On today's episode, we welcome back Chris Craig. If you remember, we had Chris Craig back in 2022 to discuss the importance of the service writer position and why it's often an overlooked position within a shop. In this episode, we're really going to extend that conversation. We're going to be able to talk about what he's learned from that episode to now, and really be able to dive in to see if there's been any progress, if there's areas that we as an industry can progress even further. So, Chris, pleasure to have you back on the show.
Yeah, Jay, I really appreciate the opportunity to come back on and talk about some of my favorite topics in the automotive industry, especially circling the service advisor profession and then how it connects to all the other positions that are within a dealership, independent shop, or whatever kind of service facility that you're occupying. I think that connecting those people, because they're very different skill sets, is a challenge. And I think it's something that the industry definitely needs a little bit more of, is to connect those two instead of opposing technician versus advisor versus parts versus everybody else, gelling them as a service team, which is ideally what they're supposed to be, to service that customer. And ultimately, I think if everybody did that, it would improve the automotive industry.
I think you're spot on, and that's why I wanted to have you back on again today. Is it is one of those relationships, and honestly, just that position in general at times can be kind of a lightning rod, and I think it's worthy of continued conversation, and really that's why we had you back on today. Now, what was interesting to me as I was diving back into you again was when I looked at your LinkedIn profile, you've got your description as content creator, digital educator, writer, Army Reserve officer, marathon runner, and jujitsu novice. You've got a lot of stuff going on, man.
I do, and for anybody that's watching, I got a wound right here on the tip of my nose. That was my first jujitsu wound right there, and my wife was thrilled about that because she doesn't want me looking beat up for the first time I hold her baby, but it just might happen that way. So it's been an
So,
adventure.
leading with that, you're expecting.
Yes. I'm expecting first baby Craig ever. Well, for me, my brother's got a baby Craig, but my first baby Craig ever in this August. We're very excited.
Congratulations to
Appreciate it.
you and your
Thank you.
wife. I know that was something that we talked about pre-show, was the changes in your life, and really how dramatically you've really kind of changed the course of your life in general. Being married and expecting a child, switching from a role as a service advisor to a digital creator, right? And really putting a lot of eggs in that basket, and you're doing an incredible job at it. Bring us up to speed on where you're at professionally.
Yeah, so it's funny. I was talking to my wife about this just the other day. We tend to go on walks every night. Helps with the pregnancy. And I said, when I posted my first TikTok, because that's where I started on social media, was TikTok. When I posted that first TikTok, I had no idea what I had just done in terms of the trajectory of my life. So I don't have a massive following. I got 112,000 subscribers across all
Pretty
my
damn
different
big,
platforms.
man.
It's good, right? It's really
Yeah.
great, and it's so powerful to have that window into the automotive industry and all those people that contribute to my page and conversate with me, and I respond to their comments all the time. That's basically my content. Is I read their comments and I respond to it, answer questions, open it up for thoughts. We debate it in the comments, and it's a very positive space. I really feel that way. But the decision to do that has just kind of put me on this trajectory into kind of going away from being a service advisor into being a service advisor coach, and then a service department coach, fixed operations coach, technician coach, and just generally doing what I can to help the industry. And that's my profession now. Is I don't only help create content for myself, but I help create content for Rocked, which is the company I now work for. Now, I think the last time we spoke, I was contracting with them,
Yeah.
but they've actually welcomed me to come on full time as an employee, and I took over as their fixed operations content owner. So anything in our content library that has to do with the fixed operations service area is now my lane 100%. So I'm responsible for that entire library of content. So not only do I get to make automotive content as a hobby, but I get to do it for a living now. And Rockhead found me through my social media. So that decision to post that first TikTok and take it from there and keep going, and then venture out to other platforms like YouTube, has been an incredible life changer for me. And I'm very thankful for the opportunity that my followers, frankly, gave me, because if it wasn't for them, I would have never been seen.
What a cool story.
Yeah.
And for you to have the wherewithal, and not even wherewithal, but the forward thinking to be able to think that maybe that TikTok could turn into something, right? And just the content in general, you've done such a good job with consistency. I think one of the things that content creators oftentimes lack is the consistency. They'll be really hot and heavy for a while and then back off, and then it's kind of this ebb and flow. I'm guilty of that. I think over the years built a lot of my network through LinkedIn. From WrenchWay's perspective, TikTok and YouTube, same thing here, where been able to build a presence there, and not me, right? Like our marketing team has done a phenomenal job. I do, however, go out to TikTok, and the comments I read on our posts, and I intentionally really only go out and look at WrenchWay posts because I know how addicting TikTok is, and I can't add another
Right.
social platform
Right.
to my daily browsing. But there's still a lot of concern out there, right? Just reading comments on TikTok, and I love the fact that yours is largely a positive presence, because I do feel like our industry desperately needs more positive, more of a positive message, and the fact that you're bringing that positive message is really encouraging to everybody in the industry. How do you stay consistent? How do you keep on top of your game there? Because you have done an outstanding job at it.
Well, I appreciate that. I really do. And, as far as consistency goes, I don't always want to make content for TikTok and YouTube and everything else. I don't always want to sit down and write a LinkedIn post, but um, I just found myself in a routine. Back when I was working in the dealerships, it was a little bit harder. I had to record a bunch of drafts, because that's what I would do, is I would record a couple videos to post throughout the day or throughout the week in the morning before work in my truck. So it was dark outside, you couldn't even see me. If I was lucky enough to have a lunch break as an advisor, I would do it over my lunch break. And I just made it work. I was very into it. I made it work. And the passion back then was telling my stories, like the things I ran into throughout the day. Later on in life, when I left the dealership and I was garnering this following, I probably had like 20, 30,000 followers at that point. I'm like, well, I don't want this page to die, because it's very impactful and it's actually educational and helpful. And it's people like this. And I like this. So how do I keep it going? So there was a bit of a struggle there, because I didn't have the stories anymore. And that's when my content turned into like skits. So I took comments and then I put on a pair of sunglasses and I pretended to be somebody, and then I pretended to be somebody else. And just to create the scenario, because I was no longer experiencing new scenarios. All my stories have been told. So I had to create new stories. So I did exaggerated versions of things that can occur in a dealership to first get people interested in the post,
Attention.
because,
Yeah.
oh, geez, that's happened to me. I'm so angry now. Let me go to the comments. But then I end it with like elaborating my thoughts on that and then opening it up to everybody else to do their thoughts on that. And as far as consistency goes nowadays, it the first step to being consistent on social media is you have to have a topic that you're passionate about. If you're going on social media just to get a following, you're generally not going to make it, because you're not
No.
passionate about a topic. You're just going to go on there and just try to get a following, and you're going to try to say different things. You're not going to be consistent with your topic. You have to stick to a topic, right? Or a couple of topics. If you just go out there and talk about puppies one day, cats the next day, laptops the next day, a table and a chair, no one's what is this page? I don't know what I'm doing here. So you're not going to garner a big following with, and if that's your only goal, it's going to be very, very hard to be consistent. But if your goal is to go out there and talk about a topic that you're very passionate about and make an impact on people within that topic, like for example advisors, technicians, and managers and stuff of the automotive industry, which is for me, and people are looking to you for that content. I mean, I have the same names in my comments every single time. I have a couple, like 5 or 6 or 7 different contributors that are just there on every single post. I don't know if they have their notifications on for when I drop a post. I'm very consistent with the timing and all that. But that's the key to consistency, is to be passionate about it. And then the other thing is you got to post at certain times. There's advantageous times to post your content. I choose 5 o'clock every day because my analytics tell me that that's the best time. I don't make a post at 5 o'clock every day because I'm having dinner with my wife at 5 o'clock every day. So what I do is I take my lunch break. I go out to the truck, because that's where I record all my content, because that's just what works. That's what it's always been. That's been the brand. Go out there and I record my content at lunch. I'll do like 3 or 4 videos. And I'll say, okay, I have content now. I'll come back in. I won't even edit them yet. I'll edit them day by day, and I'll get them ready. Like around like lunch the next day, I'll edit one video. And then at 5 o'clock, I hit post. I walk away. I have dinner with my wife, come back to it, answer a couple of comments. And that's what works for me. So you got to find your routine, is really the lesson there. So be passionate about a topic, choose a topic, be passionate about it, find a routine that works for you, and don't worry about recording and dropping a video at the same time. I would say record those videos ahead of time and then just handpick which one you want to post that day. That's what works for me.
I want to talk about the comment section a little bit because that is something that, as a content creator and really driving that channel, it's hard to stay on top of the comment side. But how do you not get discouraged at times, right? When you read some of the comments, and probably a lot of it is true, right? When you're reading through their struggles and their stories, but being able to keep that conversation from going really negative or being combative, right? I think it can be really easy to defend our industry at times, and at times our industry doesn't deserve it, right? They're frustrated for a reason, and a lot of times it's a warranted reason. So trying to get somebody who's ultimately there to vent, to be able to get it out and then work toward a resolution.
Right. Yeah, it's a characteristic that I actually learned from my time in the military, which I'm still in the military. I shouldn't say my time in because I'm still in, but as a leader in the military, there's different leadership styles, and the one that I have found the most effective for me personally is empathy. And that is the approach I would encourage anybody to take when you have those discouraging comments in your comment section. And I'm not talking about like the negative stuff where like I just hate you, Chris, because I get those too. But when they're just like, I am so sick of the industry and I can't, I had someone telling me the other day that they work, I don't even know, like 12 physical hours a day and they're only turning 16 hours flat rate a week. And that's devastating. And,
Wow.
here's the thing. I can't solve that problem for that person. That's not something I can do with content at all. But what I can do is level with that person and go at it empathetically and say, that's terrible. I would hate to be in that position. But if I were to make content on that, we can only control what we can control. So maybe a discussion with your manager is warranted, or maybe you should really look at the repair orders you're working on. Are you doing a lot of repeat work, or do you have a lot of comebacks coming back your way? Are you not as thorough? Are you doing thorough inspections? Are you communicating with your advisor effectively? Maybe those things will solve the problem, maybe they won't, but, I start with an empathetic approach, totally understand it. I see both sides of it, right? I see that, maybe this person's just not putting forth enough effort. Maybe this person is putting forth so much effort and it's just not working out for them. No matter which one of those they are, and I don't speculate on which, I recognize that both are possible. I then go into like, okay, well, here's a couple of things that you could potentially do on your own to start solving these problems. And for that person specifically, I would say go have a discussion with your manager. Say, hey, is everyone experiencing this? Or is this just me? Am I the problem here? What's going on? Be very open with it too, and be willing to, be humble enough to know that you may be incorrect in a situation or you may be at fault for a situation that you're in. And also communication with your advisor, communication with your parts associates, communication with your fellow teammates. That can go a long way. It may not solve the problem, but it will get the ball rolling. If nothing else, if the hours don't change, at least it's more positive for you. At least you have better relationships with your coworkers. And that is a positive change in some aspect. And then once you're in that more positive space, you can look at it more clearly, with clear set of eyes and maybe make a decision to actually solve that problem later on. So it's basically those starting steps. So empathetic approach is really how I keep myself sane doing all this.
I think it's a really good approach, and I think when you say empathetic leadership style, that's something that I think our entire industry could learn from, right? In
Yeah.
having some of that empathetic approach in management, which I do see kind of a shift in our industry to more of that approach. And I don't know if it's just younger generations coming in and maybe that's just more of a younger generation style. I've had mentors over the course of the years that I think the best ones have been the empathetic ones and the ones that listen and really want to help you as a person rather than kind of drive something down your throat. Talk to me about management styles a little bit, and really maybe what you're seeing from content and how you've seen the application of that in real life, and everything management, because this is just um, such a trap, almost like of a conversation, because once you go into this, it is it's hard to get out, right?
Right. Yeah. So management styles. So I like to make a distinction, and we talked about this a little bit pre-show, is that there is a very big difference between a manager and a leader. And often a manager has to be both, but they're both totally different skill sets. And I've studied both in both civilian and military capacities. And I've studied leadership for over 10 years. I've studied management for about 11 or 12 years. So I've studied both. I understand that they're both there and they both exist and they're both totally different skill sets. So the empathetic approach actually comes in on the leadership side. On the management side, that's when you're managing your personnel in terms of numbers, who's showing up on time, how many do we have on staff, payroll. That's where you're managing your numbers, your metrics, how are hours per RO, how are ASRs, all of those different things. How is shop flow? How backed up are we in work? Basically, anything that you can quantify, that's a management function. But as far as leadership goes, you can't lead those numbers. You can't lead hours per RO. You can't lead, the amount of backlog that you have. That's not stuff that you can lead. The only thing you can lead is people. And you can't be empathetic to numbers, you can be empathetic to people. And that's why I attribute to the empathetic characteristics to the side of leadership. And that leadership is a muscle that has to be strengthened just like any other muscle. You have to work it out. When we go out to the gym and we work out, we're tearing our muscles and they're building back stronger. You have to work out that leadership muscle. And if you're not working it out, that means you're ignoring your people. So if you're only focused on your numbers and metrics and everything that's going to keep the business alive, that's good. But if you're not focused on your people, that's very, very bad. There's very different aspects to the health of a service department or a team. If you're focusing on your team and being empathetic as a leader, you're going to have much better outcomes. And I'll bring it back to like a service advisor level example. I worked at a dealership that was very focused on CSI. They cared about numbers like sales and stuff, but CSI was the big thing. And I was thinking to myself, like, man, if I'm so focused on making this customer happy, I don't know if I'm going to sell that much. And I do get paid off of some of those things. And I was kind of worried about it, but I tried it. I said, okay, you guys want this? I'll do this. I had the best sales that I've ever had because I was so courteous to my customers. So I learned that day, or not that day, throughout the course of that employment, that the more I focused on the people, the better the numbers were. So as a manager, the more I focus on my people, the better the numbers were. They'll take care of themselves. So focus on your people, lead your people, obviously manage the numbers, make sure if you've got something that's like tanking in the red, we have to do something to fix that. But you can fix that not yourself, but through your people. So if you have a service advisor, for example, that generally does an okay job, and all of a sudden 3 months in a row they're not hitting the marks that they're supposed to be hitting. Do I just swing the hammer, fire that person, or do I yell at that person, or do I move them somewhere else, or do I say this person is usually really good, has been with me for 5 years, and all of a sudden 3 months in a row has a problem and is not meeting standards? What's going on? That's the empathetic approach. Pull that person in and say, hey, is everything good? What's going on? How can I help you? I've noticed that you've been tanking these last 3 months. You're not in trouble, but we do have to fix this, and I would like to fix this together. So how do we move this forward? What's going on? That's the empathetic approach in terms of leadership.
Do you get the feeling that maybe our industry lacks that leadership side, that we are so focused on the management side that, the lack of leadership is why we get some of those negative comments out on social?
I get the feeling, and I get the feeling through social media because there's a very sour taste in the comment sections of my post for management in general. And that's not to say that all managers in the automotive industry are just terrible and bad. And I've met so
Right.
many great ones, so many great ones. But there's bad eggs out there, just like there's bad everything out there. And it's not necessarily that they're bad people or anything; they just have bad habits. The general consensus that I get from my subscribers is that people strive to become managers because they think it's less work. They think that once I'm a manager, I don't have to worry about handling 60 customers at a time anymore. I can kick back and let everyone else handle it. And all I have to do is look at these numbers every day and be like, yeah, okay, we're still doing good. And maybe I got to send a report up or something like that. But they don't understand that the reason why there's only one manager in most cases, or two or three, or there's less managers, we'll say, than service advisors or technicians or anything else, is because they're they're a unique position and you can only have one or two leaders to a group of people. Additionally, managers are compensated more typically. There's a reason why you're compensated more. As a technician, as you move up from C to B to A to master technician, you're compensated more as you go up. You're responsible for more repairs as you go up. Instead of doing just oil changes and tire rotations and coolant services and brake fluid services and brake pads and maintenance, you're now diagnosing transmissions and engines and drivetrains and check engine lights, and it's a lot more on your plate. But you're compensated a lot more per flat rate hour if you're on flat rate, or just by hour salary, etc. So when you move up as a manager, you're compensated more. So why is that? It's because your responsibilities are so much more greater. And it's because you're leading people as well as managing figures. And if you're only doing half of that, you're not earning the other half of your paycheck, which is already probably pretty decent because you moved up to the manager level. So a lot of people don't feel like the manager is there to help them. And there's a lot of talk in social media right now about servant leadership, and I like that. I do like that because here's the thing: if a service advisor is working for a manager, and that manager is working for a general manager, and that general manager is working for the owner, Who is working for the customer? In that scenario, nobody. But if the owner is working to support the general manager and the general manager is working to support the manager of the service department, and the service department manager is working to support the advisors can then work for the customers. If the advisor's working for the customers, they're happier, they're spending more, and guess who else gets more money and more work to do? The technicians. So when they make these break recommendations and all these other recommendations, they actually sell more often. It's not about selling all these things, but in automotive, the more we sell, the more customers we help. We're not selling you anything you don't need. So there's also like, oh, well, we don't want to sell a bunch of stuff to customers that they don't need. That's not the case at all. You do need this coolant service, and you do need these tires, and you do need these brake pads. So if we're supporting our team as leaders, as managers, our service advisors are much more able to help these customers make sure their vehicles are the safest things possible on the road, which ultimately does help our technicians have a much more healthy paycheck at the end of the week, and they'll feel more fulfilled. Kind of sucks when vehicles come in all the time and I can't fix any of them because everybody says no all the time.
What a great explanation of that. And I could not agree anymore. I think when you talk about that empathetic leadership style, all the way down to, when you go to the service manager, service advisor relationship, if there's a lack of empathy there, there's just that really, it's not even distrust. It's just, they don't like each other. Right. Or it's
Yeah.
not like you're not seeing it through the eyes of that advisor and in maybe some of the struggles that they're having, and honestly vice versa, that it's really easy. And I know I've talked to so many technicians over the years that have moved their way up into a management type of role and come back and said, if I would have only known how hard it is on this side, when I was out in the shop, I just look up in that office and see that person staring at their computer all day and think, oh, that's easy. And, you
Yeah.
just talk on the phone and type in your computer all day, and it's easy. And then once you're in that seat, it's a completely different perspective. And I've always been a huge proponent of uh, kind of having a technician or advisor or whoever it might be go sit in that chair, right? Go sit and watch that person work during the course of the day, so you do have a true understanding and respect. I've heard more and more shops that are doing that as part of their onboarding process, right? When you're coming in and you're training, hey, let's cross train you with some other positions so you can have an appreciation of what that position does. And I do think there's still a lot of shops out there that view that as, okay, that I'm not getting the technician or the advisor out to work as fast. Man, if you can take a few days, a week to do some of that cross training, I truly think the impact of what you see on top of just building a better relationship with that person off the bat is impactful, possibly for years.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, it makes me think. So, a book I read once, it was called "We Were Soldiers Once and Young." It was by retired General Hal Moore. The movie, people probably have seen the movie "We Were Soldiers." There's a quote from that book that I'll have to paraphrase because it's rather long and I can't remember it totally. But basically, the gist of it is that it mentioned that in the Civil War, it was customary for the officers to not ride on their horses while in march with their soldiers, because if they're not marching with their legs like they're soldiers, it's hard to gauge how tired those soldiers are. If they're not carrying their own backpack full of gear, they don't know how heavy those straps are weighing on those soldiers at 5, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock at night after they've been marching all day. If they are getting more rations than those soldiers, they don't know how hungry their soldiers are. And if you don't know those things about your soldiers, it's very hard to lead them effectively because you're feeling pretty good up on your horse. You got your backpack on the back of the horse, your shoulders are feeling great, you haven't walked all day, you got double rations. Not that they really get double rations, but they might have a little extra food on them or something. They can eat while they walk because they're on a horse. And then they're, sitting there. It's been 12 hours since we started this big long march, and we're wondering why everyone's tired. Like, get back to work. We need to get these trenches built. We have to get ready. It's really hard to gauge how much energy and how much morale your team actually has if you're not there with them leading from the front. That's a big principle for me, is leading from the front. And now that doesn't mean that you're always on the front doing the job of the advisor, doing the job of the technician, because obviously as a manager, you have your own job. But management by walking around is very powerful. just take the time to walk around your department, walk around your service advisors, see what the status is, look at their eyes, see how busy they are. If their desk is covered in repair orders, probably time to pull it back a little bit. Maybe you can support them. Maybe if you notice they have a line of 3 customers to check out, step in and check out those other 2 customers that are waiting while that service advisor is helping the one customer. My first dealership I worked in, I always tell my wife I'd still work there if it was local to where I wanted to live. I moved away from that area, but the manager there was actually really great. This is the first and only manager I ever experienced to do this. Every time it was my lunch break, I knew it because he would show up at my desk to work my desk for that hour while I took lunch. He did it every
Wow.
single day, and then I would come back. There was 2 service advisors, myself and another. When I would come back, the other service advisor would go to lunch, and that manager would bump over and start working his desk. And then he would go on lunch last afterwards. So it was a 3 hour span of everybody taking lunches, but everybody had coverage because him and I together equal the manager essentially. And, he would cover my desk and then cover the other advisor's desk. Didn't happen in any other dealership. And when I moved to the next dealership after that one, I'd stopped taking lunches. I just couldn't do it. I was too busy. I had too much going on. It was just so overwhelming. Of course, we had a lot of turnover at that store, so it was very, very difficult. But the manager had AC. I did not at that next store, and I barely ever saw him because it was hot in the South, and he didn't know how hot it was for us. He didn't know how difficult it was for us. He didn't see how overwhelmed we were because he was in his office, and I kid you not, his blinds were closed. He couldn't even see on the service lane to see what was going on. So, a manager that's engaged and involved, not constantly doing the job of the service advisor, but helping out when that manager is able, because obviously they have their own job. Is a lot of people hear that, well, I don't have time. You have time. You certainly do have time. When I commanded a unit in the military, I didn't have time to be with my soldiers, but I was with my soldiers as often as I could be because I like to be, because I like to be around those people and I like to see what's going on and I like to actually feel what they're feeling. How hot is this sun? How warm is the water they're drinking? How does the food taste that they're having to eat out here? How is it eating an MRE in the middle of this hot sun? I don't know. Let's hop out there and see what the status is firsthand instead of asking someone to bring me a report to my desk while I sit inside. So leading from the front is definitely how I'd respond to that.
That first manager was the epitome of Simon Sinek's book, Leaders Eat Last. He did it in reality, right? Every
Yes.
single day, which
Yes.
is incredible. So shout out to that manager. If he or she happens to be listening, because I do think that's incredible. Like that's a leader right there. Right. And
Yeah.
it is such a fine line between, I'm going to help this person out for an hour and not like just to completely take over their job. Right. And I think it's hard for a lot of managers, especially on the management end of the spectrum rather than the leadership end of the spectrum, to not just step in and micromanage every single thing. Right. And I think when you do that, talented people really get discouraged because it kind of drives this distrust. It drives that, this person doesn't think I'm good enough to do this job. And it, ultimately tries to turn them into robots. And I don't see that working very often.
Yeah. Micromanagement is certainly never the best approach to any situation. If at the end of the day, here's the thing about a manager. Sometimes I think that managers like to micromanage because that means a lot of things have to flow through that person, meaning that I have to have my hands in everything and I have to be controlling everything that's going on. And what that does is it gives a perception of I am very important. And if you ever lose me, this place is going to fall apart because I'm like the quarterback of the New England Patriots back when Tom Brady was around. When we lost him, we kind of lost the team a little bit. Not that I'm a Patriots fan,
Yeah.
but they struggled for a bit because they built a team around one person. Not that he was micromanaging his team by any sense, but it's kind of plays into the principle. So if we have a manager who's micromanaging and has their hands in everything and they're controlling every action of everybody doing everything, there there's a couple of problems here. For one, they tend to delegate their responsibility, which they cannot do. You cannot delegate responsibility as a leader. You can only delegate authority. But you've delegated your responsibilities to these people. You've made them in charge of everything you're supposed to be in charge of, and you hold them accountable for all those things. But you can hold them accountable, but not for the things you're responsible for, not for the success of your department, success of your people. That's always on you. But since you're micromanaging, you have not delegated authority. So you've done it opposite. So you've given them all the responsibility in the world and no authority to do anything. So you've tied their hands and said, okay, get to work and do all these things that I'm supposed to be doing. Like, it's ridiculous. They can't do that. It's supposed to be the other way around. You're supposed to delegate your authority, train them how to utilize it, manage them, make sure it's like, they're not, left and right limits. They're not doing too much or too little or whatever it is. Maintain that, train them. and give them the authority to do the things to achieve the responsibilities that you're responsible for. So if you're micromanaging your people, here's the problem. If a manager is micromanaging, it means that they have um, essentially wanted too much control. And what it turns into is they're not an effective manager. And how you can gauge an effective manager is counterintuitive. If that manager is like, if it looks like if we pluck this person out, this department will fail, that is a inadequate manager. Inadequate because a good manager is doing so well that they could take a 2-week vacation and that department will run without skipping a beat because that manager has trained the personnel. They've applied policy and procedure that is clear to everybody. They've created an effective team that's cohesive that can work together, and they don't need someone pointing and saying and doing and make sure you're doing this and orchestrating the whole thing. The band plays on its own without the person in the front doing all the things with the wand. You can take that person away, and the trumpets know when to go, and the drums know when to go. They've practiced this song. They're all on the same sheet of music, so they know how to move forward. So an effective manager is counterintuitive. Is they essentially work themselves out of a job, but obviously they still need to be there because they have their own job to do because they have reports and things that they have to do as a manager to track and maintain and ensure are doing so, making sure everybody's on the North Star. So an effective manager would never micromanage ever because they want to create an effective team that can do their jobs on their own, absent the engagement of a manager. And that's when it gets fun for the manager because then they can step in and just help out, and it makes them look like a superhero.
What a great explanation. Again, you have a really good way to, I think, take some of these very complex things and make them, I think, breaking them down to bite-sized, understandable pieces. So I appreciate that. This week's episode of Beyond the Wrench is brought to us by Jasper Engines and Transmissions. Okay, your customer's engine or transmission has failed, but now is not the time for them to trade their vehicle. Not without a working engine or transmission. Besides, would they have kept their vehicle another 3 to 5 years if their engine or transmission had not let them down? If you answered yes, then Jasper Engines and Transmissions is your choice to give your customer's vehicle new life and many thousands of miles of enjoyable driving performance. When considering the high cost of a new or newer used vehicle, there's a pretty good case to be made for replacing a drivetrain component that has failed or is delivering poor performance. Rather than trading their car, truck, van, or SUV, install a quality remanufactured Jasper product for less than your customer would have to invest in a new vehicle or a newer used vehicle. Check out their website at jasperengines.com to learn more about the money-saving value of Jasper. One thing that I thought was really interesting that you're working on, and we touched on this quite a bit in the last podcast, was the technician advisor relationship and how important that is, how overlooked that is in a lot of shops. I know, again, in my conversations with technicians, they can be great technicians, and if they don't get along with their advisor, it makes life hell, right?
Yeah.
And I'm interested to hear from you what you've learned about this over the past couple of years and if you're seeing any changes, good, bad, or indifferent.
Yeah, so it's funny because I've always said that there's that very big, huge brick and mortar wall between the lane and the shop. And then the people on each side of that wall just don't communicate to each other. And that's the technician and the service advisor. And it's just what's crazy is the service advisor is the central point of all information that flows through the service department via customer. Essentially that the service advisor represents the customer to the technician and represents the technician to the customer. And actually, my college professor put it this way: they're like a ball joint because they pivot between parts and customers and technicians all day long. Thought that was kind of neat, like a little
What a
automotive
great
tie-in.
visual. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. So if you're not getting along with your ball joint, you can't turn your wheels. You can't go in the direction you got to go. You got to have a good ball joint in there, and you got to communicate with that ball joint. So if your power steering system isn't telling ball joint time to turn, well, then that's not going to work out. You're going to keep going straight, and you might hit something you don't want to hit. So run into a wall, stop making money, stop making flat rates. So that communication piece is really, really important. And there's a concept. You already mentioned a really good book. I'll mention another good book. It's Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink. Great book.
Yeah.
A lot of people have read it. It goes over a concept called cover and move, which speaks to me because I've trained that actual battle drill in the military, but he applied it in a business sense, which was very fascinating. So basically, what it is a lesson on teamwork. And what that means is first we have to communicate. Okay, we have to communicate, and that brings in respect because I'm going to respect you by listening to what you say, which means actually listening and not waiting to respond. I'm going to hear you. And then in turn, you're going to respect me because you notice I respect you, and you're going to hear what I have to say. And if we do that long enough, we're going to garner trust, right? So we have respect and trust between us now because now we're now a team. And with that communication, I can hear your hardships and you can hear my hardships. And maybe I have some resources that I can employ to help you with your hardships. And maybe you have some resources that you can employ to help me with my hardships. So now you're covering me while I move, and I'm covering you while you move. And we're actually operating as a team. And if you can bring this to an example, maybe you have a technician that says, "Hey, Chris, like the last three tickets you wrote is customer states check engine light is on. If you could get some more information for me, it would actually help me diagnose these faster. I mean, there's a check engine light and there's a code. I'll get it eventually. But if you could tell me if there's some symptoms or how long it's been on, that would really help me with my diagnostic procedure." And then the advisor says, "Okay, I hear you. I'll definitely ask those questions, but what should I ask? Because I really don't know." Okay, well, what you can do is first ask, like, how long has it been on? Does it come off ever? Do you experience symptoms when it's on? And give them a list of questions that they can actually ask. So that's a bit of that cover and move concept right there because they're communicating and they're moving forward. And then maybe you have an advisor that approaches a technician and says, "Hey, man, like I've been putting these W's on the top of these tickets, and that means they're waiters, but it doesn't seem like you're doing those very quickly. It seems like you're doing these other ones. Is there any way I can get you to do those waiters first?" And the technician will say, "I absolutely can, but both my bays are always tied up with all this other work that you've been writing up. So if you could space those out a little better, not slap me with three waiters at a time, I can definitely work them in using this bay I have over here. But these are the most advantageous times for you to actually write those tickets, and we can move this forward together." So that communication piece is really, really, really important for the advisor and the technician to have. Now, if we don't have that communication, what we have is animosity. We have a tech, excuse me, we have a technician that says, "This guy writes waiter tickets all the time and just thinks I have all the time in the world." And then we have advisors that say, "These technicians, man, they don't do anything. They just sit back there all day and play on their phones and don't get any work done. They don't have to deal with the customer like I do." And it's not productive. They're not communicating to each other. They're talking to other advisors. Advisors are talking to other advisors about how bad the technicians are, and the technicians are talking to other technicians about how bad the advisors are. They're on the same team. Teammates have to communicate. We'll bring it back to the football example with the New England Patriots. I'm not a Patriots fan, but hey, we're going to talk about them because we already went there. If we don't have the linemen doing their part and communicating with their backfield and with their quarterback and listening to what the plays are and moving as an actual unit as a team, they would have never won Super Bowls. You would have never been champions. You would have never won the football game. And that's really what it is in the service department. Is you each repair order is its own game, and you have to play them separately, and you have to communicate with your teammates to actually move that repair order forward to score a winning goal.
A common scenario that I see in shops that happens with that exact scenario that you were just talking about is that one side or the other will say, "Well, it's not my job to drive that relationship," right? And it could be both people, right? And if both people on that tech advisor relationship are both saying, "Well, it's their fault, it's their job to do this," and really kind of get into that habit of pointing a finger, I think it's almost impossible to rectify that. And techs that are listening here, you have as much responsibility in that relationship as that advisor does. And oftentimes I don't think that technicians think that way, right? They just say, "Hey, I'm out here doing my job. This person keeps screwing me over and it's making me very upset," but they don't articulate that in a way that's productive. And that drives unbelievable tension in the service department. And I think techs could do such a, and again, I don't want to lump all techs into that boat, right? Because
Sure.
that's not correct. That's not fair. But there's a lot of them. There's a lot of them that are that way and can be very difficult to deal with. And those are the ones where, regardless of how talented they are, if they don't get that right, their lives are going to be tough. The advisor's life is going to be tough. The manager's life is going to be tough. It can make everything much more difficult than it has to be, rather than just saying, "Hey, I'm going to look in the mirror here and I'm going to take some responsibility for this relationship. Maybe can we meet? Can we go have lunch someday? Can we do something? Maybe go grab a beer after work, whatever it is, to be able to get on the same page." But I just see that technicians don't take accountability for that side of it at times. And it to me, it's, I've told technicians this, that, if you want your life to be better in that regard, take some ownership of it.
Yeah. Well, you know, technicians are a tough crowd. Mostly my following is technicians, and a lot of them love me. Some of them have some choice words for me. Sometimes I've had a
Same.
couple. Yeah, I've had a couple of like entire videos made about me before, and it turned into a productive conversation. But technicians are a very very tough crowd. They deal with a lot every single day, right?
They do.
They're beaten down every single day. The industry has not been very kind to them in recent years. It's been tough. It's been very very tough for technicians. So yes, they have to take accountability. They have to take accountability for their own actions, the relationships in their place. They have to start respecting their teammates. They have to start operating as a team. But I bring the word to team because there are no bad teams. There are only bad leaders. This is a proven thing. Absolutely, people have studied this. It's a proven thing. There are no bad teams, only bad leaders. So, as a leader, if I'm manager and I notice that my technicians are always griping about my advisors, and I notice that my advisors are always griping about my technicians, if I sit back and I say, well, they got to start getting along, but I don't take action, there are no bad teams. There are only bad leaders. I'm being a bad leader at that point. So what can I do as a leader? Because that's always the next question is, Chris, well, what can I do then? What can I really do to get these people to talk to each other? Well, you can start with just a meeting. And you don't have to do it before or after hours. You can just make sure you don't schedule a bunch of cars during the hours of 1 to 2 or 1 to 1:30 or whatever it is. Bring the team together. Don't do it on the service lane where there's a bunch of customers and craziness going on. Bring them into a room or into the shop somewhere and then just get them to communicate. You might have to MC that at first. Say, hey, Mr. Technician, what are you dealing with? Well, I'm dealing with XYZ. Okay, Mr. Advisor, can you help with Z and Y? Okay, you can. Advisors, what are you dealing with? Well, I'm dealing with ABC. Okay, technicians, can you help with B and C? Okay, you can. You start to cultivate that conversation. You start to create an environment where they're talking to each other. Now, first, you have to liaison that relationship, but eventually, they're going to start doing it on their own because it's going to start working for them. And when they conversate in that controlled setting, it's a little more professional, it's a little more personable. They're not going to be fighting and arguing because the boss is in the room. They might at first, they might gripe a little bit, let them duke it out for a little while, get it all on the table, and then let's clear the air. And eventually, if you do this as a leader and you do it consistently, they will start communicating with each other and you start fostering that relationship where they're actually able to talk to each other. So, leadership has a big role in these relationships, a huge role. You have to create an environment where your team actually wants to communicate and wants to move path forward. And another way to do that is while you're in this meeting, make sure you set a goal, an attainable goal that can only be obtained if the technician and advisor actually work together. So don't set it as a goal as like that only pertains to one side or the other. You can even make it like a goal of like, hours per RO because technicians love those and advisors love those. We want to make sure we hit a goal of a total hours per RO for the shop on average of XYZ. And then everybody has something to aim at. They can orient themselves as a team to move towards something. And I would suggest a reward at the end of that, if you're able. But sometimes you don't have those resources. But maybe the reward is just something very very simple, or maybe it's just like having a goal as a reward. It's very nice to be on the same team, moving towards the exact same thing. So it takes an element of leadership to gel these teams, and then eventually they'll start gelling on their own. And for a leader that doesn't do that, that recognizes that their technicians hate their advisors and advisors hate their technicians, standards are not what we preach, they're what we tolerate. And if you say that that's bad, and you say that they shouldn't be doing that, and you say that they should be doing something better, but you allow them to continue doing the bad things, that's the standard, because that's what you tolerated. Not necessarily what you preached, but what you tolerated.
Is your shop looking to fill open positions or grow your bench of candidates? Consider adding WrenchWay to your recruiting efforts. WrenchWay helps shops and dealerships all across the U.S. find better qualified candidates for their service centers. WrenchWay Top Shop memberships are only $150 per month and include unlimited job postings on the best job board in the industry, a guarantee of 10 qualified applicants, and the shops choose who is considered qualified, access to connect with and help over 650 high schools and post-secondary schools, and much more. Learn more about WrenchWay's Top Shop memberships by visiting wrenchway.com and selecting the For Shops tab under the Solutions dropdown. Link is in the show notes. Yeah, as you're talking, it occurred to me that probably the worst leadership moment that I've had in my career was I was always very open about that side, right? And I had two employees fighting or just constantly nagging at each other, I would pull them in and allow that open conversation. it did backfire on me once, and it was probably I think my biggest failure to date of a leadership thing that I just failed on, right? Which was bringing two people in, and uh, one just started absolutely bashing the other big time, and I didn't put it to an end fast enough, right? And it allowed that to drive an even bigger divide between them. And looking back, I think life's about learning from mistakes, right? And that was a mistake that I had made, and letting it go too far. And that was the only time that I've had that scenario happen, but it did make me a little gun shy at times because I had seen it unfold in front of me, and was one of those things where it was kind of like a snowball effect where it just kind of kept growing and growing and growing. And rather than just getting in and stopping it, we kind of let it go. And um, so just a forewarning to people out there that might go through a similar situation that can happen. Just know when to step in, and when to uh, really mediate that conversation, because that can get out of control faster than you would think. And still, again, I still beat myself up over that conversation because that's the only one that's gone kind of sour, and it caused way more of an impact than it should have after the fact. So I do appreciate that approach. I do think there's a time and a place to air out grievances and be able to talk freely, but knowing the boundaries around that are really, really important as well, to make sure that you keep it on track. And that goes for you. I talked about the technician side, the advisor side as well. I mean, when you look at an advisor and their ability to drive relationships in the shop, can really have a huge impact on the shop as a whole, on the culture as a whole, and how much those technicians like coming to work. And if you're a roller coaster of emotions constantly, it's hard to maybe understand where you're going to be at the next day in terms of your mental state. Um, if you're negative constantly, then nobody wants to be around you. Like, it's being so self-aware when you're going into those types of conversations. And advisors, this is the side that I'm going to pin you on, is that you do have an obligation to make those technicians happy and drive that relationship. And knowing what we know about technicians, if you can go out and work your tail off for a technician and earn their respect, it's not going to be given the first day you step into that role. But if you get in there and you earn their respect and you listen to what their thoughts are on things, the impact that you're going to have is going to be far greater as a whole.
Right. Right. So, today we're on a podcast, the WrenchWay podcast, me and Jay, right? You've done things in your life and I've done things in my life that led us to this day, that led us to having this conversation with our professional backgrounds. None of those things happened by accident. They happened because you and I both took intentional steps in our own careers and it led us to this day and we're having this conversation. So, what the thing is there is individually, yes, what you aim at is what you see. So if you come in as a technician or advisor thinking about all the bad things about your job and career and team, that's what you aim at and that's what you see and that's what you're going to achieve. You're not going to come into work one day complaining about your hours, complaining about your team, complaining about your technician, complaining about these customers, and then just accidentally have an outstanding day. It's just not going to occur because your focus as you walk through the door, your first thoughts are, here we go, another day doing this horrible job. I can't wait to pull Indeed up on my phone and then pull it off when my boss walks by because I hate this place so much. That's what you're going to see. That's what your focus is going to be. It's very hard to change your perception of the current reality to something more positive. But if you just walk through the door and say the first 3 hours of today are going to be good, or even the first hour of today are going to be good, or the first repair order is at least going to be good. The rest of the day might be terrible, but I'm going to make this first repair order the best it can possibly be. That repair order will be the best one of the entire day. And you're going to have a good time with that for a while. Maybe eventually, like, I'd like to have more of that. So the next repair order, and then the next repair order, maybe the next day. Now this is going to be a good week, and it's going to be a good month. It's going to be a good quarter. It's going to be a good year. And you have to aim for something that's A, attainable, but B, worthy of aiming at. It's not worthy to aim at coming in to have a terrible day. When you work in a dealership, especially, right, or a service department or a service facility, independent shop, you spend more time with those people than you do with your husband, your wife, your family, your kids, your parents, anybody you know. So you might as well get along with those people. If you come into that place where you spend more time with these people than anyone else, I mean, you don't walk into the house of, I hope you don't walk into the house of your home. It's like, oh, here she is again, my wife coming around the corner. I can't wait to deal with this all night. That's terrible. You don't want to deal with that. What you aim at is what you see. If my wife comes home from work, I work from home. So my wife comes home from work, I'm excited. I'm like, okay, I get to have dinner with my wife. We're going to go for a walk, maybe. We're going to watch TV and then we're going to go to bed. It's going to be great. But if she comes home and I got a chip on my shoulder, and I'm not going to hide that chip for very long because it's on my shoulder, and she's going to be like, okay, well, what's wrong? Why you always ask me what's wrong? You know what I mean? Like it's going to start some sort of animosity. So back to the dealership or service department or facility or independent shop, if you walk through the door and your thoughts are, it's going to be a terrible day, it's going to be terrible customers, I'm not going to make time, I'm going to have terrible write ups. No one's going to buy anything. CSI is going to be tanking. My boss is going to be a jerk. Technicians are going to suck. Advisors are going to suck. They don't know anything. That's what you're going to experience the whole day. But if you come in and you say, it's going to be a good day, I'm going to help my advisors load their lips with what to say so they sell more work, or you come in, I'm going to like communicate with my technicians and ask them when they need or how long they need to complete a job and make sure I set proper expectations with my customers, you're going to have a better day. And it goes back to that communication piece, but also you have to come in with the mindset of I'm going to do better today than I did yesterday. And better can be 1%. If you do 1% once, like just, by one day, 1% on Monday, another percent on Tuesday, another percent on Wednesday, eventually you're going to hit 100%. It might take you a couple of months, but you'll get there. But the thing is, even if it's slow, each day is going to be slightly better than the last.
Do you have advice for an advisor on, say they get a negative customer interaction, which it happens in any business, you're going to have something go wrong, but how to flip that switch to not carry that into the shop, right? And really drive the morale of the shop down by taking that conversation that you had with a customer that wasn't great and then kind of taking that out on your technicians. It can really set a negative tone over the course of the day. And it's really hard, right? When you get chewed out by somebody and you're trying to kind of, I don't know, regroup before you go out to the shop. How have you handled that scenario in the past? And maybe do you have some advice for those technicians that deal with it, or those
Yeah.
advisors that deal with it?
Yeah. So step one is the most difficult step because it's hard for human beings to do, and you have to be objective, not subjective. So you have to look at it through a lens of objectivity, which means that you're kind of taking yourself out of the situation. You're just analyzing the situation for what it is. So you get a bad review in. Okay, this is terrible. It's a 1 star. This person wrote a paragraph about me. They really hate me. They really hate this dealership or this service department or whatever. Like, oh boy. What you have to do is you have to analyze it. Okay, what went wrong? What was supposed to happen? And then what did happen? And what out of that was incorrect? And once you get that pile of incorrect stuff, you say, okay, out of this incorrect stuff that happened to this customer that upsetted this customer, what was in my control and what was outside of my control? And you have to be very honest with yourself. You take a pile of stuff that was within your control and you say, okay, I messed this up and I won't let this happen again because this turned into a very bad survey. Now, there's stuff that's outside of your control as an advisor. Lots of stuff. Parts, back ordered parts, or parts came in box wrong, or parts forgot to order this tire and it took an extra day, or my technician said they were going to work on it but decided to work on this gravy job, or something happened outside of your control. You identify those things outside of your control. Now, remember, first step was identifying what I did wrong. I'm already fixing myself, so I've admitted my own failures. That's step one. You have to do that. You have to. But once you identify these things outside of your control, that's when you start communicating. If it was a technician that skipped over your ticket when they said they were going to do it and they decided to do something else, go approach that technician and say, hey, man, I got this bad survey. Here's what I messed up. But this is also a complaint they had. Is there any chance that next time we discuss a ticket that you'll be able to actually do that ticket? Or is there something that occurred on your end that I wasn't aware of that I can help you out with in the future? The thing is, I just don't want to have these bad surveys coming again. Again, I messed all this stuff up, but they did mention this. That's why I'm having this conversation. Or maybe you approach your parts desk and say, hey, got this bad survey. I should have checked with you. I really should have to see if the right tire came in the morning, but I just trusted it was here. I understand that mistakes happen. So can we do anything in the future, you and me together, to ensure that the tire actually comes in the correct one at the right time to make sure our customers taken care of? Because we got this bad survey and the manager's all over me about it. I just want to make sure that, you and I are in the same sheet of music because we're both on this ticket. It is my survey, but I just want to make sure that we're able to move forward as a team. So it's communication, and it's good communication. And it starts by admitting your own faults and then admitting that, what you've done wrong in that scenario, and not just pinning all the blame on the other person. Goes for the technician as well, because it's very easy to say, well, but you. That's never helpful in a conversation that you're trying to identify what the problems are. Whenever there's an argument, both sides argue to be correct. I encourage both sides to argue for what's the truth, and that's aligns those people, and it just gets it everything on the table. Own the pieces of the truth that were your fault. Talk about how you can work on those things together to be better for the future, and then move forward as a team.
The approach is so important as part of that communication, right? And not going in guns a blazing, not putting that person in a defensive state. The method of communication, if you're doing it via email or some type of messaging app like Slack, and it doesn't come off the way that you're intending it to,
Hmm.
that can spiral out of control too, right? In that delivery of the message, if that's not right, you're it's going to backfire on you.
Yeah, I always encourage do these things verbally. I just do them verbally. If you're not local to the person that you're having an issue with, give them a call. Send a message and say, "Hey, when's a good time to give you a call?" Set up that call. It's best to do it in person. Look that person in the eye, so they can see the humbleness in your face. Like you said, if you send a text, like for example, if I send my wife a text right now and I put a period at the end of it, she's gonna think I'm mad at her. I could be like, "I love you." I could write, "I love you." I could do this real time. I write, "I love you" with a period, and she'd be like, "What's wrong with you? Why are you upset? Why are you mad at me?" Because for some reason, when you put a period at the end of a sentence in a
So
text
right.
message, it automatically means I'm angry with you. It's like, no, that's actually how you end a sentence. She's like, yeah, but not how you do it in text. It's like, okay, but you know what I mean? So you can mean something, type it out and send it, and they can take it a completely different way because they're reading it in whatever tone they create in their head. Whereas if you verbally say these things, either over the phone or in person, they don't have to interpret your tone because your tone is there for them to actually hear.
What a great uh comparison. As you're saying it, I'm like, oh man, I've definitely done that. I've
I have
definitely
to.
not intended to do that and had it blow up for no
Yep.
reason. And it is one of those things where you I think it's easy to get the message off. It's easy to, type something out quick and just get it off your shoulders, right? That
Yeah.
it's kind of moving the monkey off your back to somebody else. And if that tone isn't right, it can mess everything up, and then it sets this awkward tension, and then it does create the need to have that conversation that we talked about earlier in the podcast, so you can prevent so much of it. And same, going back to the technician's role in this as well, how you receive things is really important too, because just because somebody's giving you some form of advice or asking you to do something a little bit differently doesn't necessarily mean it's an attack on you, but maybe you've been trained that way over the course of your career to think everything's an attack, and at times maybe you've worked for somebody where it is an attack every time they're talking to you, and that's not a fun situation to be in. But once you go through that, I think your mindset is just always trained to be defensive because you were brought up that way, right? In some sense, I feel like I'm that way at times, but being able to receive a message and hopefully assume the good in it rather than just assuming that it's a negative can be really hard. But man, you can help the conversation out so much if you just receive it the right way.
So correct. I mean, it's hard to do, and it's another muscle that you have to strengthen. But don't be on the defensive, and don't take things personally. I've gotten some really rough surveys in my service advising career. Some really rough stuff. And social media. I've had some really awful things said about me, but specifically with service advising. It gets bad sometimes. You have a couple bad months in a row and you're on commission. And it's like, I'm not making any money. And all of my technicians are upset with me. My manager's all over me. I'm going to get fired. Oh my goodness. And then you get these bad surveys and these horrible customers that were rude to you. And this person rolled their eyes at me because I told them they couldn't have a walk in check engine light thing. I mean, everybody knows that. And then if you take it personally and you put it right here on your chest, you carry it with you for the whole day. And that's heavy. And you can't really offload it to these technicians because they don't care. And you can't tell your manager because he doesn't care because you're not communicating with anybody. So what do? You carry it home, right? You bring it through your front door and then you sit down at dinner and you relive all those experiences with your wife or your husband, your kids, and you complain about work up until the point where you go to sleep. And then you have a dream about how bad work is. And then you wake up and you think about how terrible that dream was and about how you've been at work basically for the last 24 hours, but you've been talking about it. And then you drive to work thinking about how terrible yesterday was and how your dream was so accurate with how terrible your career is. And you walk through the door and it's like, you're not going to have a good day at that point. You're still reliving the horrors of yesterday. So don't take it personal. Don't take it home. It's just a job. It's an important job, but it's just a job. And it goes for technicians as well. When you have that vehicle that every bolt breaks and you can't get them extracted, and now you need extra parts and components, and you're losing your butt on flat rate, and you just can't make it. take a deep breath, put the wrenches down. It's a day. We'll come back. We'll knock this out tomorrow. We'll get back to it. It's going to be fine. It's a positive mindset is basically the lesson of this piece right here is you got to have a positive mindset. And if you have a negative mindset, like I said, what you aim at is what you're going to see. You have that negative mindset, you're going to carry that with you because it's going to be very easy to carry it around. Not very easy in a physical sense or anything like that, but it's going to be easy to bottle it all in and then you burst it out to the people you love because, well, these people love me. They're going to want to hear about all these problems. Well, yes, but not every day. You don't have to bring those problems home every day and relive those things. I mean, I say this because I did this. I worked at a dealership and it was one of the ones that inspired me that I need to make content because it was just a rough place. I mean, the turnover was so high. We went through like 15 advisors. I met my wife in this dealership, so some good stuff did happen there. But she stayed working there after I left to go work at a different dealership. And by the time she had left that dealership, about a year and a half later, they were in like advisor number 32, general manager number 3, and probably service manager number 4, 3 or 4, or something like that. So high turnover in the store. So it was terrible. And I was bringing that stuff home so often. And it was all that I talked about with my wife was how terrible the service lane is there. And I would fall asleep and I would dream of like the DMS. I would be writing up tickets and I was telling my wife to pull cars around in my sleep. And she's like waking me up, like, stop that. Like, stop telling me to pull cars around at 2:00 in the morning. It was ridiculous. So I was bringing it home. I wasn't getting good rest and I was having a very, very difficult time. So yeah, don't take it personally at all. Don't be on the defensive. Take it objectively for what it is. Analyze it. This is what I can control. This is what I cannot. I'll fix the things I can control. I'll communicate with the people that can fix the things I cannot control, and I'll move forward as a professional, and I won't take it personal.
That is great life advice for everybody, including myself. What a pleasure to have you back on again today, Chris. I'm a huge fan of everything that you're doing and maybe the different set of eyes on the industry that I think we sorely needed. So thank you for spending time. Where can people find your social stuff at?
Yeah. So LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn, Chris Craig on LinkedIn. I'm on TikTok, Chris_MF_Craig. Same username for YouTube. Those are the 3 primary places you're going to find me. TikTok's my biggest platform. YouTube is smaller than that, and then of course the LinkedIn's the smallest one. But you can find me on all 3 of those platforms. It's all linked in my bios, except for right now I'm running a survey, so you can't find it linked in my bios. But in a week and a half, you'll find them linked in my bios.
Go check out everything that he's doing. I think his message is very positive, and I think very realistic in the content that I've been able to consume. It just really jives. It really is similar to what we see in our day-to-day experiences. And I think that's why it resonates so well with everybody. Again, thank you so much for being on the podcast, and we'll definitely have you back on again, because I always feel like as we expand this conversation, there's more and more there, and it just kind of keeps going and going and going. So we've still got plenty to talk about in the future.
Absolutely. I was going to say thank you, Jay. And of course, have me back on anytime. I love coming on and especially discussing with you all these different industry issues. I do TikToks 1 to 3 minutes at a time to be able to talk for an hour about this stuff. It really helps me just kind of like vomit all this information that's been all up in here. So I really appreciate the time.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
That wraps up another episode of Beyond the Wrench. If you liked this episode, please show your support by rating and following the podcast. You can also watch the video interviews on WrenchWay's YouTube channel. Speaking of WrenchWay, did you know Beyond the Wrench is managed and produced by the WrenchWay team? WrenchWay is an online community dedicated to promoting and improving automotive and diesel careers. We help technicians find the best shops to work at, and we also help auto, diesel, and CTE instructors get more support from local industry. You can learn more by visiting wrenchway.com.